Welcome to the Help to Adjust podcast, where we deal with issues of psychology, inclusion, and equity. Today, we have a very special guest. Our guest is the director of the New Hope Mental Health Counseling Services. Based in Valley Stream, now we have a Rockville Center location. This is a person who I've known for almost a decade. I would like you all to meet Miss Lisa Farray Atkins.
Thank you, Don. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm
And I,
excited.
and I should mention your credentials. You're a person with a few decades of direct care experience, licensed mental health counselor,
Yes.
and have served in various roles of leadership in the Help to Adjust Clinic, then the New Hope Mental Health Counseling. So,
Yes.
welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Yeah. So, being the director of a clinic is a job with many different roles.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Tell me what you see in the way of tackling issues of equity and inclusion with the people who you serve and with those who you are teaching and supervising.
That's a very powerful question, and it's a big question. I think it's very layered. When I'm working with my supervisees, even when my colleagues and we get together and we're just talking about, the state of mental health and, the different types of concerns that the agency is being faced with. I think for me, when I'm teaching, it's so important that we understand the person. People are more than their symptoms.
Absolutely.
When our clients come in, they are at their most vulnerable state. But there's so much more than that. So for me, when I'm teaching, what is important for the students to understand is kind of approach the relationship from what we call case conceptualization.
Case conceptualization.
Yes.
Hmm.
Understanding the layers of what makes this person who they are. It's the culture. It's the values. It's their religious perspectives. It's their patterns of behavior. It's their strengths as well as their weaknesses. These are the things that make us who we are. It's understanding their stressors, family, friends, work, being black, being male, being a woman, being a single mother, being a single father, going through divorce, being married. Those are all different types of concerns and challenges that, as a clinician, that we're faced with helping our clients to kind of understand how they're showing up in their lives.
Right. I mean, you read the DSM-5 and it will, give you very specific criteria for what major depressive disorder is versus depressive episodes, etc. But each of those criteria are kind of things that you you could say are based on what it looks like, how long the symptoms last, and I think that what you said is very profound because mental health clinicians can either be seen one of two ways, and that is of being warm and fuzzy people who simply look at feelings, or people who are mechanically looking at individuals as a group or a cluster of symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is that the culture, um, behavioral norms in a certain setting, i.e., where the person lives, etc., makes a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you and I had the privilege of being able to do a press conference with the Assemblywoman, Ms. Michelle Solange. And one of the things that I spoke about was the impact of one zip code
Mm.
in regards to having access to proper care, whether that ranges from mental health services to housing to schools, quality of education, quality of our housing, even the quality of having access to transportation.
Absolutely.
It's all intertwined. And so when I'm working with the supervisees, these are entities that we need to be able to take into consideration when we are building that rapport with our clients. Therapy doesn't change people, people change themselves. But, in terms of being able to understand your role as a therapist and how you can best support this person on their journey, you have to understand their narrative.
Absolutely.
You have to.
So, give me a little bit about the. Have you experienced working with, let's say, black men who have a certain relationship experience with law enforcement? Give me a little bit about that.
That's a really good question. Yes, number one, I have. And it's so important for me as a female clinician that I have the ability to connect with, let's say, if I'm working with a male client who may either have had a sensitive background, where they have had interactions with law enforcement,
Yeah.
where they may have had some time where they may have been incarcerated. They move a little different. You know, those experiences affect them in a way where the world may not be as safe for them. They
Yeah.
are working on trying to rebuild their lives um, with the community, with their families. They're trying to, really find their place in the world. And sometimes it's very challenging. They're coming up with people who view them a certain way, and that can wear a person down.
Right.
So
Right.
when they have the courage to come to therapy, sometimes it's voluntary and sometimes it's mandatory. So then we have to deal with those issues and how that makes them feel. Um, it's a challenge, and I spend more time in the beginning, in some ways, normalizing some of the frustration that they're feeling because of the set of circumstances that they found themselves, whether warranted or not. I'm not here to judge. My place is to be present and to understand this person's narrative as to how they found themselves in the situation that they're currently in, and moving from where they are, because you can't change what has happened, but moving where you are, where you want to go. And what does that look like and feel like for you? How do you want to show up in your
Yeah.
life moving forward? And it's normalizing that, yeah, there may be moments they have dealt with biases, racism,
Mm-hmm.
being judged for past mistakes. How does that imprint on this person who's in front of me,
Right.
who's angry, who's hurt, who's frustrated, who's scared,
Yeah.
So it's layered.
Yeah. I think it's very important what you are saying because a clinician who, let's say, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or any master's level clinicians, social workers, mental health counselors who are working with a person like that could see that person as being paranoid,
Mm-hmm.
could see that person as being angry,
Mm-hmm.
could see that person as being the aggression that they believe is being visited on them. They actually could see that person as being aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
like you're aggressive toward the police. You don't like
Mm-hmm.
uh, authority,
Mm-hmm.
but truly it impacts people,
Mm-hmm.
and to have a sympathetic understanding of individuals who have had that kind of relationship with authority is important.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little, I suppose, it's self disclosure. My own father was arrested in Maryland as he was in the military at the time, and he spent 3 months in jail,
Mm-hmm.
accused of single handedly beating up three white men.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was walking back to the military base clean when these guys who were the victims of the crime were found. They were beaten up, bloody, and there was my father, clean, weighing less than all of them,
Mm-hmm.
and supposedly with his bare hands he had done this crime to these three people. And when he was released from jail, he was simply told that there was not enough evidence
Mm.
because of the things that you talked about, the his particular identity in society, socioeconomically.
Mm-hmm.
He and many others like him are unlikely to find an attorney and go and sue.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just is something that happens.
Right.
And when I grew up with my own father, he would say, "There's the police."
Mm.
When we saw a police car passing by, there's the police.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe to us it seemed like it's hardly worth mentioning.
Right.
But as we grew up and kind of understood the dynamics with
Mm-hmm.
the police, even in a place like New York, that you would think is quote unquote more evolved, it's very real that there's this potential hostility in
Absolutely.
those interactions.
Absolutely. And, as you're saying that, um, I'm reflecting on the fact, my husband and I, we have two sons,
Yeah,
and even though this is the 21st century, we had to have that talk.
absolutely.
And that was a hard talk. That was a hard talk. And because you don't want to instill fear
Mm,
versus awareness.
right.
Awareness, And so when I'm, working with individuals who have experienced, events in their life that has, in some ways, really has changed how they see the world, how they see themselves in it. It does take time to, I guess, support them in understanding, though you may not be able to erase what happened in the past, you get an opportunity to figure out and make some different choices in terms of how you want to show up in the present,
Yeah.
moving forward,
Say more about that. Like, what are some of the ways that people may want to show up or do show up?
Right. So I'm a big proponent in terms of cognitive behavior, approach, and because we're creatures of habit, you know, but I am a big proponent about choice and perception and understanding really what's the underlying root of one's pain, what keeps us stuck. Human beings are very complex. The human condition is very complex. And, how we understand our reality really defines how we move in the world. And when you are dealing with someone or interacting with someone who, feels broken, who feels not good enough, who feels no matter how hard they try, they just can't seem to pull themselves up. Really has to do with helping them to understand the pattern of their thinking. Because how you think has direct correlation to how you feel, and how you feel definitely has a direct correlation to the types of choices that you make.
So you mentioned the cognitive behavioral approach.
Mm-hmm.
And for those listeners who may be more lay people,
Mm-hmm.
just give a 30-second on what that is.
So, I mean, just in terms of what I, was stating, oftentimes when it comes to the thought process, it really, you 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 really believe what you think.
Yeah.
Someone who is preoccupied with negative thoughts tends to ruminate on those thoughts. There's a direct correlation in terms of how you see yourself in the world. You don't feel as safe. You spoke about paranoia. So the ability to choose to want to change your perception of what you think is a vital part in terms of allowing yourself to move forward, to change your perception of what is. And through cognitive behavior therapy, it really does have to start with the thought, understanding the underlying roots of why you think of why you're thinking the way that you're thinking. And do you want to change? Because change comes with a cost.
Ah, that is very profound.
Yeah.
Do
Change.
you actually want to change?
Yeah.
What's the cost of
Yeah.
making the change?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about cost/benefit analysis. So those are some of the exercises that I do with my client. I'm a big proponent not only about choice, but readiness for change. Because sometimes we have people that we work with and they want to come and they want to vent. And I get that. I understand that. And I leave room for that. But then I want to move you to getting a better understanding. Do you want to change?
Absolutely.
Because change comes with a cost.
Cognitive behavioral therapy. Dr. Albert Ellis is credited along with Beck and other people with being the fathers of that modality. And I remember when I was in graduate school at Queens College, we went to see Dr. Ellis give a session in front of an audience where this young man, who I believe was about 19 or 20 years old, was talking about how he had to do these things that his parents expected of him, and some of the things were not necessarily valid. They might not have been things that would have directly caused him harm, but they may have hurt emotionally things that he didn't feel comfortable doing or want to do. And Albert Ellis's approach was kind of, for me at least, it was kind of harsh. But he took the approach of, I mean, why do you think that you have to do these things because your parents want you to do them. You're 19 years old. You could decide not to do it, and I mean, it doesn't make you feel good. Why do you want to do it then? And it was a harsh approach, but essentially that's somewhat what we do. We try to help people to see the why in what they're actually doing, and if they can decide in the sessions, it's not us saying you don't need to do this, but if they can decide in
Right.
those sessions that this is not healthy for me,
Right.
it can lead cognitively, their thought process can begin to change, and we can facilitate that professionally.
Absolutely. You know, most people don't do things just for the sake of doing it. There's something in the human condition where you're benefiting from it. And for me, I want to understand from their lens, because it's through that person's lens, what are you gaining out of doing what you're doing?
The reward. What's the reward?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everybody has a carrot.
Right.
So it's taking that time and making that space for that person to feel comfortable to do a deep dive in some cases, and understanding, well, why do I do what I do? What benefit am I getting out of that? And so for a while, it's important to meet that person where they are, but you're not there to stay there with them.
Right. Right.
Right. So, and that's where that, really being able to build that therapeutic rapport with that client is so essential. One of the things that I really appreciate about the New Hope is that we're so diverse in terms of the types of therapists that we have. One of the things that some of the clients speak about highly is that they see themselves. We are so multiculturally diverse there, and I love it. Because that's what's needed. Sometimes individuals put off in attending their mental health because they don't see themselves in someone who they feel that they can trust to understand who they are, being able to see, be able to connect.
Yeah.
So it's not easy. Therapy is not for everyone. One of the things, and just kind of circling back around to what you were talking about when I'm teaching supervisees, is that therapy doesn't change people. People change people. The role of a therapist is, what they bring to the table is an understanding of the human condition, and strategically, putting a client in the position to make a choice,
Correct.
because
Correct.
life is going to happen.
Yeah. I One of the things that I had noticed over time is that what you mentioned about people really having a payoff of some kind for behavior that even they themselves may say is dysfunctional is a real thing. I remember at times talking with people who, specifically where it regards anger and even aggressive behavior, the person would say, I want to attack this thing. I don't want to be like this. But then as you really talk with them, they say, well, look, I'm a tough guy. I'm a street guy. And that's kind of like how we do it. And then when you explore that with them, it turns out that exactly what you said, that the being aggressive, being tough, verbally, maybe even intimidation, is something that has worked for them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? People don't like anger. People back up from you when you are angry.
Mm-hmm.
People
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be the object of, tough talk or
Mm-hmm.
aggression. So it does work to get you your way at times.
True.
And so the client in that case has to be willing to say, I no longer want my way if it comes with me behaving that way. And that's a different question
Right.
from just, do you want to stop behaving that way?
Right.
Because which is more important, to get your way or to change the behavior?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So again, it comes down to choice, and and then the next step is there enough flexibility in the thinking
Mm-hmm.
to be open to receive alternative approaches to behavior?
Flexibility. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, can can most people change? Yes. Do all people change? No. Primarily because if you're not open and flexible, nothing new can get in. So therefore, there's little room for change. You know what you know. That's what you're comfortable with, and therefore you're going to stay right where you are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's very real.
You know.
The way the neural pathways work
Mm,
in terms of learning new behaviors, new ways of
mm-hmm.
being open, is
Mm-hmm.
that if you begin to be open, that opens up pathways, and then if you actually behave a
Mm-hmm.
different way,
Mm-hmm.
do something different, say something different, your thinking changes. It does in fact open pathways that become more and more open the
Yes.
longer you actually do the thing
Mm-hmm.
that you are pushing yourself to
Mm-hmm.
do.
Mm-hmm.
So if a person is inflexible, unable, let's say, to take a new approach,
Mm-hmm.
it would be very difficult then for them even going to therapy for months
Absolutely.
to effect some real change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so interesting because just what you said right there, you know, when I'm in supervision, especially with new clinicians, they're so eager to want to help and, you know, they want to change the world and they want to do such great work with their clients. And I appreciate that. But I do remind them that you won't be able to help everyone because everyone doesn't want help.
Hmm.
And, you know, if you're going to be in this field, you have to be willing to accept that everyone has a right to have their own experiences. They have a right not to want to change, you know, and you have to learn to be okay with that you won't be able to help everyone,
Hmm.
you know, because you have some people who can come and they can share, you know, what their thoughts are and they can let you know what the problem is. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're interested in changing it. So now we're talking about readiness for change, which needs to be assessed.
Right. And then there's often the fact that people may believe that they're ready for change, and then it turns out
Mm-hmm.
that they may even be learning about their own unconscious processes. Wow, I
Absolutely.
really need this. I
Mm-hmm.
don't really want to be very different. And then there's also, I think, people who, as you mentioned, come because they want to vent and
Mm-hmm.
share, and
Mm-hmm.
they, you know, I often ask myself, those individuals who are really coming for that, is that helping them?
Mm.
Because possibly, in the same way that you may look at the the metaphor would be a pipe, expanding and the pressure busting the pipe. Maybe we're decreasing the pressure in the pipe and allowing them to flow more evenly through life just because they have the venting. Because when you vent to friends, it's your friends. Well, from my experience, your friends usually have an agenda, which is to make you okay. Let's just
That's
get
true.
you back to
That's
normal.
true.
Let's bro, stop talking about that. Don't even
Right.
stress that.
You're going to be okay.
Right? You're gonna be good. You don't need her. You don't need to even do that. Whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Because they want your equilibrium so that you can just be a friend again. And if you keep talking about something, you might even find yourself with your friends like distancing themselves from you, right?
Because it becomes too overwhelming. They don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So
Or sometimes friends even or family, whoever you're having, if it's a relational issue, whoever you're having the issue with, they start hating the person or disliking the person more than you, and so now you've caused another issue.
it's true.
So coming to a therapist, I really believe has the ability then to allow people to have an outlet in a safe space
Yes.
so that they can talk about it, and that therapist is bound. We're bound by confidentiality,
Absolutely.
HIPAA, and et cetera.
Absolutely.
So we can listen and not get involved in the ways that I just mentioned, right?
Absolutely. There are many times where I have said to clients, leave it here. Leave it here in this room. We'll be here to pick it up during the next session, so that they don't feel like they have to take these deep feelings that they're trying to work through and kind of what I call bleed out
Mm,
with friends and family.
right.
Because the friends and families, as much as they may love them and care for them, have their best interests at heart, they don't know what to do with it.
They don't know what to do with it.
They don't know
I
what to
agree
do
with
with
you.
it,
Yeah.
So therapy, I believe in therapy. Is it for everyone? No. Because not everyone is ready, receptive, willing to allow themselves to be vulnerable. But, when you have the right components and you really are showing up because you really want to understand yourself better, because most people know themselves, and that's something I emphasize too when I'm teaching. Most people know themselves quite well. Now, what they're ready to share, what they're ready to really deal with, explore, do a deep dive,
Different
that's
matter.
that's a different story right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
We have to understand that and even respect that. And that's where initially meeting a client where they are is essential. You can't rush the process. Being respectful of differences. Really taking the time and effort to understand the layers, because we're heavy, we're complicated. There are people I've worked with that have dealt with some serious issues around racism, and it's changed them,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not for me to dismiss those feelings and thoughts. It's to be able to acknowledge them,
Yeah.
to be able to, in some sense, join in, for a moment to understand what has shaped this person, these
For
events
sure.
here,
For
So
sure.
I love being a mental health therapist. It's not easy, but I believe in it. Since COVID hit, people are struggling. people who look like us, people who don't look like us. But people who look like us are struggling. And when, you and I have talked about, some of the challenges when it comes to insurance companies, some clients have a delay in seeking services because they may not be able to afford it.
Yeah. The period of COVID-19 is a very rich time in terms of events that were life-changing. So
Absolutely.
I mean, without even being in this field, you could imagine that anyone with anxiety would have suffered because the news is telling you constantly that the death toll is up.
Yes.
The hospitalizations are up.
Yes.
Oh, this, COVID-19 is just running rampant in New York. And so I had a lot of people with anxiety that were dealing with that. I mean, even people that I knew that knew that I was a mental health provider were kind of like asking me what kind of things they could do to get their anxiety down.
Right.
And they were not necessarily getting treatment at the time. Everyone was affected in some way, but some people who had mostly been very stable were struggling.
Right.
Then you had May 2020, the George Floyd killing murder that I think rocked people.
Yes.
There were people who did not want to even see the video of this man being killed slowly by a knee being compressed on his neck. I mean, there were a number of people I knew that simply said, yes, I know all about it, but I couldn't
Right.
watch it.
Right.
And
Right.
I remember having a client saying to me, Don, I'm not good with white people right now. This was her words, and
That was honest.
right, and it was as counselors, as therapists, there's a lot of issues that we can't solve like that.
Right.
There's nothing you can really say to. I mean, because you certainly don't want to say to the person, "Well, it's going to be fine. It's all right." You have to let that person talk about what they're feeling. And even as something as abstract as I'm not good with white people right now, we have to deal with the honest feelings of our clients.
Absolutely.
Have you
Absolutely.
experienced similar talk?
Yes, I have, and I had to make sure I took care of myself first,
Mm-hmm.
because I knew I was coming up against some clients who were struggling with, what's been happening in our society. And I could understand.
Yeah.
As a therapist, we have the responsibility to maintain that sense of neutrality, right? But I understood.
Mm-hmm.
I understood. So oftentimes, I was that active listener, just like you were saying. I'm here to be that person where you can be that honest and that open and that authentic with how you're feeling. But then we're going to need to make some choices,
Mm-hmm.
because if you continue to remain in this state of anger, frustration, what is the overall benefit to that? Right. So again,
Stress level high
absolutely,
for an extended period of time.
absolutely,
Walking around in the environments that you have to walk around in, feeling very negative feelings
absolutely.
towards other people. I mean, it can have a an effect
a
on you.
rolling effect, you know. So a lot of conversations around, well, where do you go from here?
Yeah,
You know, so I'm here. We listened. You know, we explored. We did a deep dive. But what's the next step?
yeah,
Because life is still going to move forward. But where are you going to position yourself?
hmm
You know, so a lot of work around that, because these are individuals that, you know, they have families, they have relationships that were being affected because, you know, the person's state of mind was fragmented, you
right.
know. So we had to do some serious work around that. And, you know, even at New Hope, we're big advocates about your self-care. What do I do? You know, there are things in the world, and the world is changing. It is different. There's certain things you don't have control over, at least for now.
I
You
think,
know,
now that statement, things that we don't have control over, I think
hmm
that that is the meaning of being human.
absolutely,
And the human condition is woven into why mental health providers are important. Because
absolutely.
if we lived in a world where we weren't vulnerable to sickness, to
hmm
injury,
hmm
to the psychic effects that other people can have on us
hmm
by exploiting us or taking advantage of us or seeing us in some kind of narrow way,
hmm
that ends up affecting your self-esteem or affecting your sense of being. If there weren't all of those possibilities,
hmm
then being a therapist wouldn't be so important. But those are the things we have to deal with
absolutely.
every day,
Every
and
day.
therapists are not immune either to all of the possibilities that I mentioned.
hmm
Feeling insecure about one thing or another, or
hmm
feeling upset or angry. In fact, I talk often about how part of the work of being a therapist is to to have a strong point of view on your own sense of security,
hmm
so that you're in a position to help others. So each therapist should go through some therapy themselves,
hmm I
and
agree.
if you if you feel strong enough,
Mm-hmm.
then you're able to help more people. Like, but I know that many women therapists cannot work with sex offenders, for example, because
True.
it brings up too much
hmm
that they've known in their own lives or people close to them, and it's really hard, for example, to see that person as beautifully human, so to
hmm
speak,
hmm
so that you're able to want the best for them and really treat them with the love and compassion that you would want to give to a client.
That's honest.
So I mean, what are some of the major diagnoses,
hmm
Lisa, that you see through your supervisees and
hmm
through your own client interaction? What are the diagnoses that you see that we're dealing with most often?
Um, especially from the perspective of COVID, we've had such an increase
Oh yeah.
in, you know, depression, depressed mood, anxiety, various adjustment disorders, you know,
hmm
unspecified, which, you know, that's a much larger range that we deal with. And that can, you know, range from loss of employment to unfortunately, loss of life. When we went 100% virtual, because of the COVID, there was such an increase of FMLA requests. People were breaking down,
Yeah.
So there was this, I think, a major increase in terms of symptoms, depression, not only in adults, in our children.
Yeah.
In our children. And we're still dealing with the effects. I think what we have to realize as a society, we still dealing with COVID. Even though we're getting out
Absolutely.
here little by
Yeah.
little in the world and trying to have some sense of quote unquote normalcy, we're still dealing with the effects of COVID, on top of other, viruses that are out here. When I talk to my sons who are part of the Gen Z generation, they said, "Mom, we're just so over it." But they're struggling.
Yeah.
They're struggling. That depression. I think we have really received an increase in dealing with depression and anxiety, grief. A lot of losses in a short amount of time. Grief. Life is different.
Yeah.
Life is different now, and people are trying to figure out how to cope. How do they move forward, and still not lose themselves?
Yeah.
What I call falling down the rabbit hole. So to answer your question, it's we're getting more demands in regards to that. Parents reaching out more, trying to get support in terms of skills on how to help their children. How to navigate education.
Yeah.
My child doesn't want to go back to school.
Right.
School phobia. You know, um, our children are struggling too. At the agency, we take them as young as 5. We're getting the 6 and the 7-year-olds. And we don't just work with children alone. We work, with families. So we got to deal with all of that with them. Doing a lot more advocacy
For sure.
with the school systems, and speaking with the school psychologists and the school social workers, so that we can hopefully create that space of communication, building bridges. Before you decide to suspend Johnny, because suspension is not going to help Johnny. We need to figure out what's the underlying root of why Johnny is acting out. His world is different.
Absolutely.
His world is
Yeah.
different. And we need to be able to open that line of authentic communication and, let's put this village together, because we need to talk, because our children are suffering.
We lived through a historic time.
I'm telling you.
And, I will never forget that when the first announcements came that COVID was possibly going to shut everything down, and it was as if our phones really didn't ring for about a day or two. And then after that weekend and that Monday passed where there was all of these announcements, that phone went crazy.
Yes, it did.
And
Yes, it did.
at the New Hope Mental Health Counseling, I think we saw an increase from about 380 to 400 sessions a week to, I think possibly we went to very close to 1,000 or
Yes, we did.
1050 a week
Yes, we
even.
did.
And, people, I think if there was one good thing that ended up happening out of the COVID crisis was that telehealth became increased.
Yes.
The the marker, the 95 marker on the billing log became normal.
Yes.
That this was not in office, this was telehealth. and telehealth went from something that was a possibility of being a mental health clinician, that this was a telehealth session, to the norm.
This was it.
Yeah.
This was the new way, and it was so interesting. The New Hope didn't miss a beat. We were very, very fortunate at the time of introducing telehealth, because when we were doing telehealth in the beginning, it was primarily, and you correct me if I'm incorrect, we were starting to introduce it into the program because we found that there were clientele because of medical needs. Coming into the office wasn't always doable for them.
Right.
So we started dabbling. We said, okay, well, let's
I think
try
that's
this
right.
alternative approach. And unbeknownst to us, COVID hits, and we didn't miss a beat.
Yeah.
We didn't miss a beat, and we were able to continue to service the community. And the timing was everything. And I didn't even really think I would even take to doing telehealth, because I'm accustomed to being more traditional in the office. But it was a saving grace for our clients.
It really
So,
was.
yeah, I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah. So, I mean, to segue from there, I mean, we are serving more people now,
Yes.
but what is the direction that you think that mental health care as a whole needs to take in order to be inclusive of more clients?
Well, one of the things that, you and I have been talking about, because we have a lot of young clinicians, and, at some point they'll transition, into their own practices and so forth. Insurance companies making it more doable for young clinicians, new clinicians, to get on these insurance panels,
Yeah.
especially for mental health, counselors. We need that. And, some of that is political, and you and I have gone back and forth in regards to that. We've also spoken about, even making it more doable to pay a fair price for the services that we're offering, whether you're in network, out of network, so that companies or organizations like ours can compete and provide fair, compensation, for what we do. So
Yeah.
it's a combination of those things there. I think if we're going to be able to continue to be competitive, to be able to attract talent, deserving talent, the community deserves the best of the best, and I believe in mental health. I believe in therapy, and we need to be able to work together. Insurance companies, and I remember when I first started in this field, and I came to you, and I'm doing my billing log, and I'm putting down the codes on the billing log, but then some of those codes get kicked back. And I came to you and I said, well, Don, I don't understand. I said, this is the diagnosis of this client, and you were explaining to me that, well, Lisa, that particular code is not billable. And I said, well, I need you to break this down, So that's an uphill battle that, we're still working at, but we need to find a way of making a breakthrough in regards to that. If we're going to continue to be able to provide noteworthy services, if we're going to be able to serve all communities, depending on where you live, your zip code can determine access to quality services, especially mental health services, all the way to housing and schools and hospitals and things of that nature. It's all connected.
Definitely, definitely all connected. You know, the question of healthy food in certain
Absolutely.
areas,
Absolutely.
the question of in New York, the prison population comes from 7 neighborhoods typically that are far overrepresented in the prison populations. And, those neighborhoods are right here in New York City, the South Jamaica, Central Brooklyn, including Bedford Stuyvesant and other areas. And, fundamentally, what we would like to see, I think, is people having access to mental health care and all of these services and things that make, as you used the word holistic earlier, I believe, holistically would help people to live a better existence. The thing that is really striking to me is that in 2010, when I started practicing, you know, you would look at the provider lists of providers in Valley Stream or Rockville Center, and this is no shade on anyone, but it would be a lot of older white clinicians in their 70s, retirement age, and then when you would call these folks' offices, they they had actually retired. They were not practicing anymore. Sometimes you'd get someone else who would tell you that they had moved away. They now live in Florida, and it's like you are now trying to get on the insurance panels,
Right.
and this is my experience I'm talking about. And these insurance companies would then say, "We have a flood of clinicians, and we simply are not open,
Right.
to new clinicians." And it wasn't true that there was a glut of clinicians. They just didn't have updated lists, and unfortunately, I think we're even some of these companies were even just hesitant to put new people on their list to pay.
Right.
And so they simply avoided doing that. And there's some companies that still, right now, will not add new clinicians to their register.
Right.
And I'm wondering who that serves. Does it serve the convenience or bottom line of the insurance company to not pay out? Because it certainly doesn't serve the community.
Right. So what's the overall benefit of that?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. What do you think ultimately it will take? Us getting together, maybe from a political perspective,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that
pushing our agenda more.
I think
Yeah.
that some kind of maybe letter writing, email writing campaign to say that we in the communities are suffering. I mean, we're in Valley Stream, and the other location that we have for the New Hope is in Rockville Center. And, these sound like pretty middle class, quote unquote, affluent communities, but mental health serves, is designated by the state you're in. So we serve people from all over. And
Right.
because Valley Stream is neighboring New York City, we get plenty of people from Brooklyn and Queens, from all 5 boroughs, and generally from communities that are more poor, and these communities are truly suffering. I mean,
Yes, they
you could
are.
call it a mental health desert.
Yes.
I was in Harlem as a guidance counselor for many years. People were always calling me the guidance counselor, saying, "Where could I find a therapist outside of the school for my child?" And it would be like a search on Psychology Today or a couple of phone calls that I would make, and I would try to find people for these families, but it was not easy.
No, no, it's an uphill battle, but it's a battle that's worth fighting and standing up for, you know. And well, we're here to stay.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, we're here to stay. So I appreciate what you're doing and what our president of the New Hope is doing. There's no one that looks like us right now, and really, I consider the two of you trailblazers, you know, for the future.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And, the work that you do as a director is so meaningful, as to be immeasurable.
Thank you.
So I would like to thank you for being here this evening.
It's my
And,
pleasure.
once again, Lisa Farray Atkins, director of the New Hope Mental Health Counseling Services, LMHC, counselor extraordinaire, and master administrator.
Thank you.
Remember to like, subscribe, share, and hit the notification button. And we will see you soon. Peace and love.